The order was 3 words. Do not enter. That was the full briefing. 3 words on a single line stamped under the seal of the Galactic Accord Containment Division, Sector 55 MERN. Below it, Specimen GX-9. Category 9.4. Lethal response pre-authorized. The station had been running on those 3 words for 6 days. In 6 days, nobody had asked why the animal inside was getting worse. Sable Fenn had been on the MERN holdfast for 11 minutes when the drones reactivated. He heard the electromagnetic shift before he saw it. A low, climbing whine from the wall to his left, and then 12 targeting drones came online at once, their formation locking across the far end of the corridor. The kill authorization had been filed. The system had accepted it. Everything was proceeding exactly as designed. The door to subchamber 9 was 4 inches open. Through that gap, something vast moved. 6 limbs, a triple-plated crown ridge that caught the corridor light and threw it back amber-black. The resonance membrane along its dorsal surface snapped upright, and the sound that came with it wasn't a sound at all, it was a pressure change, a frequency that pressed behind the eyes and made the corridor lights blur at the edges. The Gravathi was on its feet. All of it was on its feet, and 3 targeting locks had just found the same geometry. Sable was already standing. No weapon, no armor, no authorization. He walked to the threshold. He placed himself between the drone formation and the animal, arms out, feet planted, making himself as large as he could, which was considerably less large than what stood behind him. 3 red geometries settled on his chest. The Gravathi did not charge. It took 1 step forward on 5 limbs and placed the side of its crown plate against his shoulder. Not a collision, a placement, the deliberate weight of a decision. Sable did not flinch. His hands stayed loose at his sides. Weapons down, he said, his voice was level. If you fire through me. 38 seconds of silence, across 53 observation stations. The part that matters, what the Gravathi did next, that comes in a moment. Stay close. 6 days earlier, Subchamber 9 did not have a body in the doorway. The corridor outside it was just a corridor. Recycled lighting in long strips, right angles where the outer wall of the dead relay satellite met the station's internal frame, floor plates that had been walked by enough boots that the anti-slip coating had gone smooth in 2 diagonal lines. The whole station smelled of coolant and aerosol compound. Every corridor smelled exactly the same. After a few hours, you stopped noticing it. After a few days, Sable suspected, you stopped noticing a lot of things. He arrived on a Tuesday mid-rotation cycle, with a standard-issue cadet kit and a ration bar already open in his hand. The orientation terminal was in a small alcove off intake tier Solon 4, a corridor junction that served as the cadet processing point for this section of the station. 2 seats, 1 terminal, 1 sealed door leading deeper into the station's operational core. The terminal was running its standard welcome loop. Sable closed the loop, opened the station's shared file directory, and ate the rest of his ration bar. Most of the research files were locked behind clearance levels he hadn't been granted yet. Someone had left the intake summary for Subchamber 9 accessible on the shared tier. It had not been opened since the day the animal arrived. Sable opened it. He read it once quickly. Then he set the ration bar down on the edge of the terminal housing. He read it again. He had an expression that people who knew him had learned to read carefully. It was not alarm. It was not urgency. It was the look of someone who has just found a loose thread in something load-bearing, and who has already, quietly, decided to pull it. He finished the ration bar standing up. The MERN holdfast was not a large station. It was mid-tier, a research and containment facility built into the outer skin of a dead relay satellite, which gave it a particular shape, long external corridors following the satellite's original geometry, internal bays carved out wherever the old signal equipment had been stripped. Subchamber 9 was in the lower middle of the station, a reinforced hex cell that had originally been designed for heavy cargo. Somebody had lined the interior walls with suppression-rated composite and installed 4 redundant magnetic locks. Somebody else had written lethal response pre-authorized on a plaque and bolted it to the exterior frame. The plaque was standard issue, brushed composite, black text on gray, about the size of a man's forearm laid flat. The upper left corner was slightly warped from a prior installation, some other frame, some other door, some other thing the station had needed to name and contain. Sable stood outside Subchamber 9 on his first evening and read it. Containment, Specimen GX-9, Category 9.4, Lethal Response Pre-Authorized. He read it twice. He noted that it told him everything about the station's intentions and nothing at all about the animal. Every 30 minutes, the station shuddered. Not violently. A single sustained tremor through the floor plates, lasting about 4 seconds, followed by the hiss of the suppression cycle repressurizing. The aerosol compound was a Category 9 rated neurological suppressant. It came in through vents in the ceiling of subchamber 9 and dispersed in about 90 seconds. The station's operational log noted, each time, one of two things: suppression cycle complete, specimen response elevated, or suppression cycle complete, aggression indicators active. The log did not note what the suppression cycle was doing to cause that response. The log did not note this because nobody had asked the log to note it. Sable asked, or rather, Sable stood at the end of the sealed corridor, outside the blast-rated secondary door that separated the active containment zone from the general station floor, and listened to the half-hourly shutter move through the hull, and then stood very still for another few minutes, and then went back to the orientation terminal and cross-referenced the suppression cycle schedule. The cycle ran at irregular intervals. Not random, irregular. 29 minutes, then 34, then 27. He pulled up Dr. Veth Oran's published work in the station database. 2 papers on Gravathi sensory architecture, both filed as reference material in the station's scientific library, both accessible without clearance. The second paper had a footnote. He read the footnote. He closed the terminal, took his ration bar wrapper to the disposal slot at the end of the corridor, and went to find somewhere to sleep. Commandant Orvith Dale had not slept in 31 hours. This was not visible in his posture or his movement. He was Drenvari, and the Drenvari learned young to hold a correct silhouette regardless of internal state. His lower hands were clasped behind his back in the standard Attiz position. His upper hands were free, and he kept them deliberately still at his sides. He was 1.9 meters of correct procedure, and he had filed 17 successful containment protocols in 11 years. And the 18th was not working, and he could not locate the variable. His frill was the problem. The neck frill was involuntary in Drenvari bioluminescent tissue that displayed emotional state, whether or not the individual wanted it displayed. In a calm situation, Dale's frill ran a dim, steady amber. In a high-stress operational moment, it ran brighter amber or shifted toward white. Right now, 6 days into an escalating containment situation, his frill had been at sustained amber high for long enough that the junior personnel had stopped making eye contact with the region of his neck. He was not embarrassed by this. He simply noted it as data. The handbook said, irregular suppression intervals were standard practice for Category 8+ fauna to prevent behavioral adaptation to predictable schedules. The handbook was correct. He had followed the handbook. The animal was getting worse. He had increased the suppression cycle frequency. The animal had gotten worse faster. He had repositioned all 12 perimeter drones to active alert. He had staged the kill authorization 24 hours ahead of the standard escalation timeline. He had done everything correctly, and subchamber 9 was getting louder, and the structural dampening on the hex cell walls was showing stress markers that had not been there on day 1. Every 30 minutes, the station shuddered. Dale stood at his operations terminal and watched the 30-minute mark approach on his readout clock, and the floor moved, and the suppression cycle hissed, and the log recorded aggression indicators active, and he clasped his lower hands tighter behind his back. Down the corridor from Dale's operations post, through 2 sealed junctions and a cadet common area, Iresh Quill sat in the corner of the cadet lounge with both arms wrapped around her own ribcage. She was Pelian, a small bipedal species, slight-framed, with a capacity for empathic resonance that made her genuinely unusual in a containment facility posting. She could feel emotional states of proximate beings as physical sensation, not telepathy. She couldn't read thoughts, couldn't identify sources, couldn't explain what she felt in any terms except the physical. A weight on the sternum, a pressure in the upper arms, something that makes the back of the throat tight. She had been posted to the Mern Holdfast 3 rotations ago. She had never worked anywhere near a live Category 9+ specimen before. For 6 days, she had felt like something nearby was screaming. She couldn't locate it. She couldn't filter it out. She kept finding herself drifting toward the subchamber 9 corridor without meaning to, taking the longer route to the mess, standing at the junction for a minute before turning back. She had told herself this was professional curiosity. She had not told anyone else anything. Her arms stayed wrapped around herself. She pressed the edges of her elbows into her ribs and breathed through the feeling and waited for the half-hour mark to pass. Sable Fenn sat down across from her. He had another ration bar. He set it on the table, glanced at her posture, and said nothing about it. He opened his half of the bar, broke off a piece, and ate it. After a moment, Iresh said, I keep ending up in the corridor by subchamber 9. I don't know why. I'm not trying to go there. Sable looked at her. Probably because something down there is asking a question, and you're the only one who can hear it. She stared at him. He went back to his ration bar. That's not a reassuring thing to say, she said. It wasn't meant to be reassuring. It was meant to be accurate. She stared at him for another moment. He didn't look up. She slowly unwrapped her arms from her ribcage, held them in her lap for about 4 seconds, and then wrapped them back. Dr. Veth Oren was in her research bay at the opposite end of the station from subchamber 9, which was the closest she had been able to get to comfortable since day 1. She had a tablet in her hand and a stylus that she kept clicking against its frame, a habit she had when she was processing something that didn't quite sit right. Tap, 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 tap. The sound was quiet enough that nobody mentioned it, which meant it had been happening for a while. She had written the second paper on Gravathi sensory architecture 18 months ago. The paper was good. It had been well received. One section of it, specifically the footnote in section 4, describing the resonance membrane's primary sensitivity range from 25 to 55 Hz, was directly relevant to the magnetic seal oscillation specs for a Category 9 rated containment bay. She had not connected these two things. She was not sure if pressed whether she could explain why she hadn't connected them. The information was in the same database. She had written one half of it. Both pieces were accessible. The containment bay spec documents were filed under operational parameters, which was technically an administrative section, not a research section, and she was a researcher, not an administrator, and she had been very busy with the escalation documentation for the past 6 days. She clicked the stylus against the tablet frame. Tap, tap. The station shuddered. The suppression cycle had run on 29, 34, 27, 31, 28 minutes. No change in the logs. No change in the schedule. No change in what the station called the situation. Sable went back to the orientation terminal on day 2 and opened the scheduled data he'd pulled the night before. He laid it alongside the suppression interval record. Then he cross-referenced it with the behavioral note in Dr. Oren's second paper. Section 4, footnote 3. Gravathi resonance membrane function is dependent on accurate environmental mapping. Membrane hypersensitivity in the 25-55 Hz range makes irregular low-frequency stimulation at that range potentially disorienting under extended exposure. He read that sentence 3 times. The magnetic seals on subchamber 9 produced a sustained oscillation between 38 and 52 Hz. This was standard for Category 9 rated containment bays. It was in the operational spec document. It had been installed correctly. He sat with that for a moment. Then he got up and walked to the sealed blast door at the edge of the containment zone, and stood outside it, and closed his eyes and listened. The station's ambient sound at this junction was different from the rest of the station, layered. The hum of the magnetic seals was audible here as a low, sustained chord. Below it, or inside it, something else. A sub-bass pressure rather than a sound, irregular in its own way, moving and stopping and moving. He stood there for 4 minutes. He was not doing anything that would appear in any operational log. When he opened his eyes, Commandant Dale was standing 6 feet away. Dale's frills were at full amber. Both sets of his hands were present, lower pair behind his back, upper pair at his sides, very still. "Cadet," he said, "this corridor is restricted access beyond the secondary seal. You have no operational clearance for this section." "I know," Sable said. "I'm not trying to go in. I'm trying to hear what it's doing." Dale's frill shifted. The amber at the edges lightened, moving toward something else. It wasn't fear exactly. Sable didn't know enough about Drenvari frill states to name it. It looked like the color of a calculation that isn't finishing. "Step back from the seal," Dale said. Sable stepped back. The formal conversation happened in the corridor junction 20 meters from the blast door, with Dr. Oren present, because she had been coming from her research bay toward the main operational corridor when she saw 2 figures standing in the restricted section, and had followed out of something she would later describe in her notes as professional concern, and which had, at the time, felt more like the inability to look away from a loose thread that someone else had already found. She had her tablet, her stylus was still. Sable said, "The suppression cycle runs on an irregular interval, 29 minutes, then 34, then 27. To an animal that uses resonance mapping to read its environment, irregular is not random. Irregular is what a predator does when it is choosing its moment. The animal is not reacting to the compound, it's reacting to the pattern. Every 30 minutes, its environmental map tells it an attack is coming. Then it does come. Then it stops. Then it comes again at a different time. 6 days of that is not containment. 6 days of that is training." Dale said nothing for a moment. His frills had gone white at the edges. "The cycle interval is standard protocol," he said. "Irregular scheduling prevents behavioral adaptation. It prevents adaptation in species that process time sequentially," Sable said. The Gravathi maps its environment acoustically and through low-frequency resonance. It doesn't read a schedule, it reads a threat signature. The irregularity isn't confusing to it. It's familiar, he paused. I think it's starting to feel like home. Dr. Oren's stylus made one tap against her tablet and stopped. Dale looked at her. She looked at her tablet screen. She had the expression of someone who has just opened a footnote. Sable continued. The magnetic seals on subchamber 9 produce a sustained oscillation between 38 and 52 Hz. He nodded toward Dr. Oren without looking at her. Your second paper describes the Gravathi resonance membrane as primary sensitive from 25 to 55 Hz. The containment system has been broadcasting directly into the animal's primary sense organ at near peak intensity, without interruption, for 6 days. It can't turn the organ off. It can't reduce the input. It's like a sustained tone, played at near maximum volume into a listener who has no way to cover their ears. Oren's tablet tilted slightly in her hands. She was reading something on the screen. Her stylus had stopped moving entirely. There's also the fracture, Sable said. Dale's lower hands tightened behind his back. Approach has been assessed as high risk, the proximity required for medical intervention. The fracture in the weight-bearing rear limb has not been treated, Sable said. His voice didn't rise. The station has documented its pain responses as aggression indicators. That is not data. That is a record of what happens when you hurt something and then note that it reacts. Silence. The station did not shudder. They were between cycles. Oren said very quietly, the membrane sensitivity range. Her stylus tapped once. I never cross-referenced it with the containment spec. Nobody said anything about that. Sable asked for one thing. Not entry into subchamber 9. Not a protocol override. Not a review committee or a formal assessment. He asked for 20 minutes of quiet, the suppression cycle suspended, the magnetic seals reduced in frequency if possible, the drone perimeter at standby rather than active alert. 20 minutes, he said. No entry, no contact. I want to hear how it behaves when the station stops attacking it. Dale said no. Sable waited. This was something he did without apparent effort, not aggressive waiting, not performative patience. He simply waited, the way a person waits when they're not in a hurry and have already decided something. Then he said, Commandant, the animal is getting worse on the current protocol. I'm asking for 20 minutes to try something that is not the current protocol. What I am asking for is already less than what the protocol is currently failing to do. Dale's frill cycled from white to amber to something that had no specific name in the station's environmental color chart. His lower hands released from behind his back and then clasped again, tighter. He said, You are not authorized to enter subchamber 9 under any circumstances. I understand, Sable said. If I grant a cycle suspension, it is a 20-minute observational window only. You do not approach the secondary seal. You do not communicate with the specimen. You stand at the blast door junction and you observe, and after 20 minutes the cycle resumes. That works, Sable said. Dale stared at him for 3 seconds. Why does that work? What do you expect to observe in 20 minutes of quiet? I don't know yet, Sable said. That's why I want to observe it. Dale turned and walked back toward the operations corridor. Oren looked at Sable. Her stylus was in her hand, but she wasn't clicking it. She said, He didn't say yes. He didn't say no either, Sable said. Give him a few minutes. She looked at him for another moment. Then she looked at the sealed blast door. Then she looked back at him. The membrane sensitivity range, she said again. Quieter this time, not asking a question. Just holding it. Section 4, footnote 3, Sable said. Good paper, by the way. She left without responding to that. 12 minutes later, Dale sent a message to the operational log granting a 20-minute suspension of the suppression cycle, effective immediately with the notation, observational assessment, authorized under commandant discretion, containment zone adjacent only. He did not send a message to Sable directly. Sable was already at the blast door junction when the hiss of the suppression cycle cut off. The floor stopped its regular tremor. The station went quieter than it had been in 6 days. He stood at the junction and closed his eyes again. For 12 minutes, nothing happened that would appear in any log. Then, through the blast door and the secondary seal and the 4 reinforced walls of subchamber 9, he heard the sub-bass hum shift in register. A long, sustained note dropping from the higher edge of the Gravatha's distress frequency toward something slower. He wouldn't be able to describe this accurately in a report. He had no instruments. What he had was 3 years of working on a rewilding reserve where large predators had been reintroduced after a 2-century absence. And the thing he had learned in those 3 years, the most important thing, was that an apex animal in genuine distress and an apex animal that had decided to wait were almost indistinguishable from the outside, except in one small way. When it was waiting, there was a frequency underneath the threat sound, very low, very quiet. You had to be close, and you had to be still, and you had to have decided not to be afraid before you tried to hear it. He had heard it twice in 3 years. He heard it now. He opened his eyes. He walked back to the cadet lounge, found Iresh Quill in the same corner, arms around her ribcage, and sat down. "How's the screaming?" he asked. She looked up at him sharply. "It's less. The last 12 minutes, it's less. What did you do?" "Nothing yet," he said. "I just wanted to know if I was hearing it right." She stared at him. "What does that mean?" He picked up the half-ration bar he'd left on the table from that morning. "It means I'm going to go talk to Commandant Dale." He went back to Dale that evening with one request that was different from the first one. He wanted entry, not the blast door junction, not observation from the corridor. He wanted the secondary seal partially released and the inner door of subchamber 9 opened 4 inches, and he wanted to sit in the outer threshold space between the blast door and the inner door, and he wanted to do this unarmed, without protective gear, without tools. Dale's frills went white. "What you're asking for," Dale said, "would place a living person in direct proximate range of an uncontained Category 9.4 specimen." "Yes," Sable said. "The kill authorization has been staged. If the specimen makes any move toward you, the drones will." "I know," Sable said. "You know," Dale repeated. His voice had gone very flat. "You are a first-rotation cadet with no containment certification and no operational clearance for this section. You are on day 1 of your first assignment. What makes you think I would authorize this?" Sable thought about it. "You've filed 17 successful containment protocols," he said. "The 18th isn't working. You followed the handbook exactly, and the situation is worse than when you started. At some point, a person like you starts wondering if the problem isn't the situation, it's the handbook." Dale's lower hands were very still behind his back. His frills ran through 3 colors in about 2 seconds. "You don't know anything about me," Dale said. "I know you've been here 37 hours without sleeping," Sable said. "And I know you're still here." Another silence. The station shuddered. The suppression cycle had restarted. The 20-minute window had ended when Sable was in the lounge with Iresh. Through 2 doors and a blast-rated wall, subchamber 9 registered the compound and the log recorded. Aggression indicators active. Dale's frills went to that color again, the one with no name. He stared at Sable for 12 seconds. Sable counted them. Then Dale said, "No tools, no armor, no protective gear of any kind." "I know," Sable said. "If the specimen makes a move toward you, the drones engage. I will not restrain them for a cadet who walked into this without clearance." "I understand," Sable said. "You will not speak to me afterward about what I should or should not have authorized." "Fair," Sable said. Dale looked at him for one more moment. Then he turned and walked to the operations terminal, his lower hands unclenched from behind his back. He did not look at Sable again. The authorization came through 3 minutes later. Sable removed his cadet vest in the corridor outside the blast door junction and folded it over his arm. He was wearing a gray undershirt beneath it. He looked at the blast door, then at the corridor camera mounted above it, then held up the last half of his ration bar directly to the camera for about 3 seconds and set it in the outer threshold space. Then he sat down on the floor, cross-legged, back against the wall. He reached up and pushed the inner door to subchamber 9 open 4 inches and left his hand on the edge of the frame, not blocking, just present. Above him, in the upper observation walk MERN 7, 2 station researchers had come to watch the feed. Dr. Oren was not among them. She was in her research bay with her tablet open to the containment spec document and the second paper side by side, stylus not moving. Iresh Quill was in the upper walk. She had come without deciding to. She was standing at the railing with both arms wrapped around her ribcage and her chin tilted down toward the observation glass. The feed from subchamber 9 showed nothing for the first 3 minutes. Then nothing for the next 4. 18:15. 7 minutes of documented stillness from the animal. The feed from subchamber 9 showed Sable cross-legged on the outer threshold floor, back against the wall, hand resting on the 4-inch gap in the inner door. The corridor lights ran at their usual steady hum. The magnetic seals held their frequency. The suppression cycle had restarted 4 minutes ago, and the log had recorded its usual entry, and the animal had not moved. Then at the 7-minute mark, the security log timestamp read 000704. The entry field for specimen response read Specimen stationary. It was the first time in 6 days that field had said anything other than aggression indicators active. 6 days of logs, every entry. Aggression indicators active. The station had built a record, entry by careful entry, of what it had been doing to the animal. Not what the animal had been doing. What the station had been doing and the animal's response to it, filed under the animal's name. 000704, specimen stationary. One careful step toward the open door. Then the drag of the injured rear limb across the floor, audible on the feed's audio pickup as a specific sound. Not a shuffle, not a scrape. A deliberate placement, and then a pull. The Gravathi moved the way something moves when it has decided to move despite the cost of moving. On the upper observation walk, Iresh Quill's arms were still wrapped around her ribcage. Then they weren't. She put both hands on the railing and leaned forward and said nothing to anyone. Below, Sable did not move toward the door. He did not extend his hand. He did not make a sound. The ration bar sat beside his knee where he'd placed it. He had not offered it. He had not held it out. He had set it down in the outer threshold space, the way a person sets something down when they are not trying to do anything in particular, and the fact of its presence was already enough. The Gravathi stopped 2 meters from the open door. Its crown ridge was at full extension, all 3 plates lifted. The resonance membrane along its dorsal surface was running a sound that wasn't quite a sound, 26 to 30 hertz, felt in the sternum before it registered anywhere else, the kind of frequency that made the corridor lights flicker at the edges. The air pressure in the outer threshold space changed. Sable breathed in, breathed out. He did not reach for anything. He did not move back. He did not perform. The crown ridge lowered. Not all at once, gradually, plate by plate, the way something lowers when the decision is being made in real time. The first plate came down, then a long pause, then the second, then the third, settling until the whole ridge was horizontal, and the Gravathi's head was at the level of Sable's knee. It placed the crown ridge on the floor. Not near his knee, near his knee. 2 centimeters of clearance between the edge of the crown plate and his leg. The hum dropped in register, not stopping, settling, moving from the distress frequency into something slower, something that pressed against the floor plates and moved up through them rather than across the air. The corridor lights flickered once, steadied, flickered again. Iresh Quill exhaled. She had not known she was holding her breath. She released it all at once, both hands still on the railing, and the physical sensation she had been carrying for 6 days, the one she could not name or locate or filter out, shifted. Not gone. Different. It stopped pulling at the back of her throat and settled somewhere lower, and she recognized for the first time that it had never been distress on its own. It had been a question held at high pressure with nowhere to go. The question had found somewhere to go. Below, the security feed timestamp continued. 000917, 000918. The log was still recording, the field still read, specimen stationary. It was not stationary. It was very much present and close and deliberate. The station's classification system had no field for what it was actually doing. Down the corridor in her research bay, Dr. Oren had 2 documents open on her tablet. She had stopped clicking her stylus 11 minutes ago. She was reading the containment spec document and her own paper side by side, and she had not yet started writing the revision, but the revision had already begun in the part of her that reads footnotes. The kill authorization arrived at Dale's terminal at the 11-minute mark. Filed correctly, every field complete. Escalation timeline met per protocol. Authorized remote by Haran Oss, Sector Security Relay Analyst, who had been tracking the Subchamber 9 situation from a monitoring post 2 relay nodes away for the past 6 days. He had never been in the same room as the animal. He had never been in the same room as Sable. He had followed the handbook exactly, reached the correct threshold, and filed the correct form. The system accepted it. 12 drones reactivated. The wall to Sable's left gave out the low, climbing whine he'd heard 11 minutes ago on his first day, the electromagnetic shift, the formation locking across the far end of the corridor. The kill authorization had been filed. The system had accepted it. Everything was proceeding exactly as designed. The Gravatha's resonance membrane snapped upright. The crown ridge came off the floor. All 6 limbs found their positions in one movement, not a lunge, a placement, the body assembling itself into its full shape the way something does when it has been threatened enough times to know what threat sounds like before it arrives. The membrane ran its frequency at full intensity. The corridor lights dropped to half power and stayed there. The pressure change was immediate and total. 3 targeting locks found their geometry. Sable was already standing. He did not reach for anything. There was nothing to reach for. He took 3 steps to the threshold and placed himself between the drone formation and the animal, arms out, feet planted, making himself as wide as he could, which was considerably less wide than what stood behind him and considerably more present than the drone formation had calculated for. 1 cadet, 12 drones, 53 stations watching. The station-wide feed had activated at the moment the kill authorization processed. Every screen in the MERN holdfast, 16 remote monitoring stations, the sector relay post where Haran Os was watching a feed that had, 11 seconds ago, shown a stationary animal and a cross-legged cadet, and a ration bar on the floor. The feed now showed something the relay post's log structure had no category for. 3 targeting locks settled on Sable's chest. Behind him, the Gravathi took 1 step forward on 5 limbs. The injured rear limb dragged. The sound of it was audible on every feed that was running. It pressed the side of its crown plate against his shoulder. Not a collision, a placement, the deliberate weight of something that has decided where it stands and is standing there. Sable did not flinch. His hands stayed loose at his sides. He looked at the drone formation. Not at one drone at the formation, at the geometry of 12 targeting locks arranged across a corridor that now had a person in it. Weapons down. His voice was level, not loud. The feed picked it up without difficulty. If you fire through me. He did not shout it. He did not perform it. He said it the way he said everything, like the next fact after the previous fact, already decided, already sitting. On the upper observation walk, HFY's hands tightened on the railing. She was looking at the feed screen and at the observation glass at the same time, trying to hold both images at once. The Gravathi's crown plate against Sable's shoulder, the targeting locks on his chest, the drag mark of the injured limb in the corridor dust. She said it quietly, to no one beside her, to the observation glass, to the thing she had been carrying for 6 days. It's not trying to hurt anything. It just needed someone to stay. At the operations terminal, Dale's lower hands were pressed flat against the console. Not gripping, pressed. His frill had gone past white into something that had no standard color designation. The bioluminescent tissue running a response his species didn't have a name for because the situation his species had not previously required a name for. He was watching a first-rotation cadet stand in a kill zone with his arms out, and a Category 9.4 specimen's crown plate against his shoulder, and the specimen was not attacking, and the cadet was not moving, and the 12 drones had not fired because the targeting geometry included the cadet, and the authorization had not accounted for this because the authorization had been filed by someone who had never been in the same room. He knew the protocol was correct. He stood at his terminal for 11 of the 38 seconds. Then his lower hands came off the console and moved to the command panel. Dale's voice, when it came, was barely audible on the operations feed. 3 words. He had the presence to recognize later that it was also 3 words. Stand them. Down. The drones powered off in sequence, not all at once, one after another down the formation line, the red targeting geometry collapsing from 12 points to 8 to 4 to none. The electromagnetic whine dropped in pitch and then went quiet. The corridor came back to its normal light level. The Gravathi did not move for 6 seconds after the last drone went dark. Then the crown plate lifted, slowly, from Sable's shoulder. The membrane frequency dropped. The corridor light steadied. The resonance fell from Felton the chest to present in the room to quiet, all in the space of about 30 seconds, and the station's ambient hum reasserted itself the way ambient sounds do when nothing is competing with them. At the relay post 2 nodes away, Haran Os's terminal showed. Authorization executed, stand-down issued, protocol outcome, non-standard. There was no field in the form for what had happened. The form had been filled out correctly. The form was complete. The outcome did not fit any of the outcome categories, and the terminal was waiting for an input that the input system had not been designed to receive. Somewhere in the framework, a gap had opened that had no form number. Sable stood at the threshold for a moment longer. His arms came down. He looked at his hands, both of them briefly, the way a person looks when they are checking that everything is still where they left it. Then he sat back down on the floor, cross-legged, back against the wall. The Gravathi settled, not away from him, near him, its crown ridge at rest, its 6 limbs folded under its body in the slow, deliberate way of something that has made a decision about where it is safe to do that. The injured rear limb was visible in the way the body arranged itself around it, the slight asymmetry, the careful placement. On the feed, you could see exactly what the aggression logs had been recording for 6 days. HFY watched from the upper walk until the image stopped changing. Then she watched for a while longer, arms loose at her sides for the first time she could remember. Dale did not restart the suppression cycle. He walked back to his operations terminal and stood in front of it for a moment. He made 3 entries in the operational log. He did not file a protocol deviation report because the protocol had been executed correctly and the outcome was non-standard, and there was no form for non-standard outcomes. He left the suppression cycle offline. Nobody asked him about it. Nobody filed a note. He went to find Sable 18 hours later. His frill was at dim resting, the low, steady amber of someone who has slept and processed and arrived somewhere. His lower hands were clasped behind his back, but loosely. He found Sable in the cadet common area, eating a ration bar, which appeared to be a thing Sable did at all hours. Dale stood in the doorway. "Show me what you saw in the file," he said. "From the beginning. No contest, no defense, just show me what you saw." Sable set the ration bar down and stood up. Dr. Oren filed 14 pages of revised assessments over the following 48 hours. The opening line of the revision read, "All prior behavioral classifications for GX9 must be considered products of the intervention environment." She did not hedge this. She did not write the documentation suggests or preliminary indicators point toward. She wrote it as a plain declarative sentence and sent it to the station's scientific record and copied the Accord's classification review board. Her stylus was quiet for most of those 48 hours. The suppression system was decommissioned, not suspended, decommissioned, which required 3 separate authorizations and a written justification. Dale wrote the justification himself, in one sitting, in plain language. The magnetic seal frequency was redesigned by a Mern Holdfast engineer who had been waiting, she said afterward, for someone to ask. The fracture treatment took 3 hours. Sable sat on the floor of subchamber 9 for all of them. The medical team worked around him. They had not planned to work around him, but the Gravath's resonance membrane ran a sustained low hum throughout the procedure, steady at 26 to 28 hertz, and the medical team's instruments recorded this, and one of them noted it in her report as specimen response during procedure cooperative. When she wrote cooperative, she was using the only field the form offered her. It was the closest the form could get. The new position took 3 days to name. It was backdated to the 11-minute mark of Sable's first day on the Mern Holdfast, which was when he had first stood at the cadet orientation terminal and read an unlocked summary file that had not been opened since the day the animal arrived, and had set down a half-eaten ration bar, and had looked at the screen with the expression of someone who has found a loose thread in something load-bearing. The plaque went up on the 4th day. Sable stood outside the door and looked at it. He read it once. He didn't read it twice. It was the first honest thing the wall had said. 3 weeks later, Iresh Quill came to subchamber 9 for the first time. Not to observe, to enter. She stood at the outer threshold for a long moment with her hands at her sides, not wrapped around herself, just at her sides, and the sub-bass hum ran its frequency through the walls, and she felt it the way she felt everything, as a physical sensation she could not entirely name, a weight that had no location. But this one was different from the thing she had carried for 6 days. This one was not screaming. This one was more like a room where someone had left the heat on. She stepped through the doorway. A voice from the far wall, Sable's, unhurried, not looking up from the floor. "Slow, breathe even, that's all there is to it." She breathed slow, she breathed even. The hum continued, the lights held steady. The Gravath's crown ridge was at rest, and its 6 limbs were folded under it, and the injured limb had healed to the point where the asymmetry was barely visible now. And the room was quiet in the way that rooms are quiet when the thing that was wrong with them has been addressed, and the room has not yet learned to be loud again. On 53 observation feeds, across 16 remote stations and every screen in the Mern Holdfast, the image did not change for a long time. Nobody moved to close the feeds.